Explained by the Billy Meier contacts. Mysteries, myths, legends, conspiracy theories, historical inaccuracies, and more. Compiled by David Chance, revised October 18, 2023.
Creation energy, spirit vital essence. See also creation, universal consciousness. See also creational laws, see concepts. Values and wise advice from the Billy Meier contacts. See also death, dying, afterlife, and reincarnation. Contact Report 003.
A human being is capable of living for several hundred, or even thousands of years when it has attained a certain spiritual and consciousness-based relative state of perfection and a correspondingly high and healthy mode of life. But after this stage of about 40 to 60 million years, the spirit no longer needs a purely material body, and it becomes a half-spirit body. It then lives only half materially for another 60 to 80 million years, and in such high spheres that one can no longer get in contact with it from the purely material human vantage point, unless there is a very high level of consciousness-based and spiritual evolution. After 60 to 80 million years, then, the half-spirit, that is to say half-material form, transforms into the first pure spirit form and enters the level of Arahat Atharsata.
Contact Report 008.
What about the inheritance of knowledge, or simply the intelligence?
This is in no way related to the genes, because intelligence is the result of the evolution of the consciousness. However, spiritual and consciousness-based thinking and its resulting factors such as knowledge, essence of wisdom, and intelligence are pure factors of the consciousness, which can therefore express themselves consciousness-based and organically in the brain, which consists of acid substances. These acids form the carriers of consciousness-based essence of wisdom and intelligence in a solid form, while the spirit, however, fundamentally contains within itself the same knowledge as a fine fluidal factor.
Another question concerns soul and spirit, Simya say. Am I right with the assumption that they are not one and the same?
Of course, soul and spirit are not two different terms for a single factor, namely, not only for the spirit, rather, they are based on two different values.
Okay, and what about the human psyche? It is actually the soul, right?
You know and understand more about this than any of those you call clerics, psychiatrists, or philosophers.
Contact Report 010.
The human being is bearer of a spirit that does not die, and that, even in deepest sleep of the human being, never sleeps, that records all thoughts and impulsations, that tells the human being whether his or her thoughts are right or wrong if he or she has learned to pay attention to it. This spirit within the human being is the bearer of the creational realm, and it is characteristic of all human beings. It is incomprehensible that the human being speaks of a heaven and of a kingdom of heaven in him or herself, and does not simply content with just saying, creation, truth, knowledge, essence of wisdom, spirit, consciousness, and existence. The human yearning lies in the joy that remains, in the immortal life, the lasting peace, the spiritual and consciousness-based richness that never passes and lasts eternally. Firmaments and earth will pass away, but truth, knowledge, essence of wisdom, and spirit will never be variable or pass away. The spirit and the consciousness keep a lookout for the absolutely fully developed, for harmony, for peace, cognition and recognition, for knowledge, essence of wisdom, truth, and beauty, for love and for the true being, which are altogether of absolute duration. They all together result in that which forms the spiritual kingdom. They are all present in the creational. They all are there in the existence, as genius of all ingenuity, as melody of all melodies, as ability of all abilities, as highest creational principle, as miracle above all miracles. The dimensions of the inner within the human being are endless. The image of the creation, the spirit in him or her, the existence that is dimensionless, it includes all dimensions in it and transcends, at the same time, all dimensions. The spirit is the miracle of all miracles, from which all power arises. But a miracle means use of the power of the spirit in fulfillment. The spirit, however, remains eternally young and is never subject to signs of aging. What is lasting is the existence of the spirit, the truth, the knowledge, the essence of wisdom, the reality. It is necessary to recognize them and to build them up, because only they make the human being free. If the human being recognizes the existence of his or her spirit, then the old age can no longer inflict anything on him or her. Essence of wisdom is a distinctive attribute of the creation, which dwells as a part of the creation, as spirit, in the human being. Therefore, the human being should multiply his or her knowing essence of wisdom through his or her consciousness, and accordingly, he or she will recognize the creation. Essence of wisdom and love increase his or her dedication to the fulfillment of the given creational natural laws, because spirit and creation are one. Miracles upon miracles are contained in the kingdom of the spirit. This mighty, tremendous, and all creational spiritual intelligence of the existence creation. And the human being is connected with this immense spirit. With these kind powers of the existence, of the creation, of the spiritual intelligence, because a part piece of this spirit intelligence of the creation dwells as spirit in the human being and gives life to him or her. Its powers, its joy, its peace, its freedom, its essence of wisdom, its knowledge and its ability are unimaginable for those consciousness-based, unknowing, illogical ones, critics, know-it-alls, those dependent on religions, perverted and other misguided ones. After all, what is a human being? He or she is only a figure and a name. If one takes away the name and the figure, what is still left of him or her? There remains the fundamental essence, the existence, the spirit, and the overall consciousness block. The spirit, the source of all unending creational upbuilding, is itself the innermost inner core nature of the human being. The human outer nature, however, is full of limitations, because it is not the inner core nature itself, but only its shell, its material body, a limitation, a matter leading into delusion, the source of hardship and pain, limited in cognition and will, in readiness to make sacrifices, in freedom, love, and happiness. If the human being views his or her fellow human beings only externally, materially, then he or she sees nothing but the form and shape, the material of this particular human being. If, however, he or she sees the fellow human being with the consciousness-based and spiritual eyes of the cognition, and knows that this all-witnessing consciousness in him or her is also present in all others, even if it is unrecognized by them, then the way in which he or she sees his or her fellow human being changes fundamentally. He or she then no longer simply sees a man, a woman, a girl or a child, but sees the fellow human being as bearer of a creational spirit, which knows about itself, about its existence, and wishes to reveal itself through everyone if only the opportunity to do so would be offered to it. The one who knows the truth sees the fellow human being based on this knowledge and cognition, because he or she sees the creational in him or her. The human being can free him or herself from everything. Everything can be taken away from him or her, except not the creational consciousness, the spirit, the existence in his or her innermost, this pure spiritual creational realm in him or her. He or she can be robbed of all his or her goods and possessions and be driven out of his or her home, but no one is able to drive him or her out of his or her spiritual realm in his or her innermost. So the human being should constantly be conscious of this creational, without which he or she would be unable to do any breath, to conceive any conscious thought, without which he or she would neither be able to recognize, see, hear, nor experience. That is why the great wise ones of all times say, the creational spirit is closer to the human being than the own breath. The human being is unable to escape this highest consciousness, since sooner or later he or she will fall into this creational reality, because it is the life of his or her life, the spirit of his or her spirit, the consciousness of his or her consciousness, the light of his or her light, the central thinking power of all life, the existence which is well above all human thinking, which, compared with all power of the human material intellectual thinking, sinks into absolute insignificance. It, the spirit, is able to live without the light of the physical eyes, just as it is able to live without hearing, arms, legs, and even without the outer intellect of the outer material consciousness. However, there is always still something present that enables it to continue living, namely its own creational power. This self-consciousness, this all-observing and all-registering spiritual consciousness in the human being, which looks at and considers his or her thoughts and impulsations and is behind all his or her thinking, which tells him or her whether he or she is knowing or unknowing, that is the creational, the spiritual consciousness. To ponder again and again that the Spirit is almighty, ever-present, all-knowing, and beyond that, unending happiness, unending beauty, unending value, the value of all things altogether, lets the word creation become the absolute significance for the human being and brings forth evolution-based developmental changes in him or her. As often as the words spirit and creation are impressed upon him or her, psychological changes of the greatest material consciousness-based significance take place in him or her. His or her feelings and all his or her senses change. The clearer his consciousness-based intelligence becomes through this, the more, as a result, his or her personality gains in power, and the more prosperous his or her life becomes by this. Just as light can be perceived through the closed eyelids, there is, admittedly, in every human being creational presence. However, the entire spiritual realm only visible for those who are also actually able to look inwards through their inner eye. It can only be useful to those who provide all the necessary prerequisites. Each human being carries within him or herself the whole kingdom of the spirit, but it is covered over by the unused material consciousness and struck by unknowledgeness, erroneous assumptions, not absolutely full development, bad things, errors and limitations of all kinds, which must be transformed into the opposite through the recognition and acceptance of the truth. All these bad things must be dissolved and cleared up by the human being consciously developing abilities, which are opposite to everything negatively perverted and lead to a neutral equalization. The path of the experience of the spirit is accelerated through the unfolding of the consciousness and the conscious searching as well as the gathering of knowledge of the truth. And this unfolding leads to the true and all-embracing, cosmic-wide essence of wisdom and love, due to the cognition that the creation is present in everything. The human being is one with everything in the creation, in the truth, essence of wisdom and love, in the kingdom of the Spirit. That truth and essence of wisdom, that the human being is separated from each other by space and time and the body, something which, however, is overcome through the inner experience. Essence of wisdom and love united, knowledge and truth united. The essence of wisdom and love of the consciousness and the spirit lead through experience to the oneness and to the creation as such, to the universal joy, might, and relatively absolute full development. That which is the source of all valueful things, the life of his or her life, and the light of all intelligence, the spirit and the creation. For the true creation-thinking human being, the time is not someday, but always in the immediate present. For him or her, it is not necessary to see physically to see the truth. He or she begins to search in him or herself, and the truth becomes ever more real to him or her, because for his or her material consciousness, his or her spirit is after all the all-seeing presence.
Contact Report 011.
However, spiritual and consciousness-related power is immeasurably higher than all physical strength. It is absolutely untrue that the human being is the measure of all things, for the measure of all things is the spirit. The human being himself or herself is a very multi-layered being, and his or her various shrouds conceal other parts of his or her real personality. The material intellect accepts the testimony of the material senses and their resulting conclusions, but rejects the deepest subjective intuitions. Deep insight reveals to the human being the knowledge that there is something more in him or her than what their usual consciousness mediates to them, something that is the source of all thoughts, fine spiritual perceptions and feelings, a finer consciousness-based and spiritual presence, which always leaves him or her unsatisfied with merely material efforts. While the bodily organism changes each moment and the thoughts surge up like gusts of wind and disappear again, the real spiritual self is never lost. It permeates absolutely everything, even though it is fundamentally different from everything, for its form is purely spiritual. It is the basic source of all perceptions of identity through countless transformations. It takes up in any manner and form all things into itself, and yet always remains itself, unchangeable and in the eternal symmetry of its own size. It is an invariable size within the manifold activities of the universe and the universes in general. But even when death reaches the human being, the seer and recognizer in them, the spirit, cannot die, for as a part piece of the creation, it is of eternal duration, like also the overall consciousness block. On the objective side, nothing can touch the observant, subjective self. This self, existing for eternal times, which is the life of life itself, cannot be proven materially because it is of a purely spiritual form and nature, but it requires no proof for a rational being because the spirit itself is its own proof. Hence, only beings living in poverty of consciousness demand proofs for the existence of the spirit. For in their primitive thinking, they cannot recognize its existence from the spiritual acts and occurrences. The spirit itself is the basic foundation of any knowledge process, and the spirit itself animates every organ and every capability, and to be sure, out of the drive for development and the existence of life. The spirit, this universal self, is confused by others with the empirical self as a result of mental defilements. When a human being breaks through the veil surrounding his or herself and removes the shrouds of the material urge that restrict and cover it, they instantly acquire, in the physical body, the determination of their being. The inner spiritual being, the life of life itself, which is infinitely simple and uncomplicated, forms a unity of transcendental reality, cognition, knowledge, wisdom, love, and freedom. The human being is not a mere biological phenomenon. In him or her is also a small part of a fine material, conditioned, psychological organism in spiritual form, which is loaded with latent potentialities, with the might of all creational powers. Philosophical insight into the psychological nature of human beings forces the recognition and knowledge of the reality of the cosmic consciousness, the creational life power, as the basis and life of psychological beings. The human being must not only see human beings on their biological and mental planes, rather, they must also grasp them on the psychical and spiritual planes. Everything that the human being inherits, everything that they bring with them from the past through billions of existences, everything that they, in this life or in past lives, has enjoyed, known, read, learned, or experienced lies hidden not in their subconsciousness, but in the memory banks. Therefore, he or she does not master the technique of concentration, and therefore they do not command their subconsciousness and do not make full use of all their knowledge and capability. The longing for all his or her knowledge and capability coming from past lives, for the experiences and for the wisdom thus, does not lie hidden deeply within them. They must only recognize and accept the truth, thus acknowledge it and utilize it himself or herself. But for this, it is necessary for him or her to fight against their own low intelligence and to acknowledge that the material intellect does not constitute a human being if it does not also work together in the same measures with the spiritual intellect. When this happens, and when the human being recognizes their spirit, the whole abundance gathered in previous lives will arise again in knowledge and wisdom, capability, freedom, love, and peace and will richly benefit them once they learn to fetch all these values from the memory banks and to utilize them himself or herself. Knowledge, might, strength, wisdom, freedom, and love are the creational inheritance of the Absolute, and they are the human being's birthright. The human being, through their consciousness and through their spirit, is a center of thought, might, strength, and influence on everything and everyone. He or she does indeed have a body, but they themselves are not the body. The body is only an instrument and a servant of the spirit and the overall consciousness block. It is the spirit's dwelling, but not its prison. The body is the temple of the radiating spirit, the self-luminous innermost life, the creational self. The body is the castle of the spirit, which brings all powers into motion. The human being knows from this that they also breathe the breath of the spirit, and not only physical breath. The human being only learns of their spirit through meditation, through knowing deliberate, inner contemplation, through deep immersion into the quietest chambers of the consciousness and the spiritual self, and by directly looking into the mirror of the inner and innermost life. They may not do this, however, in the manner in which the earth humans become fooled by religious and sectarian frauds, for this meditation is not a spiritual display, but only a fantasy-filled releasing of unreal wishes of the imagination. Real meditation in spiritual form requires an understanding gained towards one's own being and self, and a self-holding of both facts before one's eyes, that the existence of the eternal reality and truth, and the deeply rooted unity of all manifestations, from a star to the form of a substance, from nature to spiritual life, are altogether only one in creational balance. Every human being, in their innermost essence, is a manifestation of the creation, and only because of this is it possible for everyone to become one with the infinite. Reflecting upon these truths of the essential existence of the creational produces knowledge and certainty. Life on Earth offers no full satisfaction to human beings. It is not the entirety. The real is found on the other side of the material. Material life only serves as a guide in order to reach that which is fine-sighted, the spiritual. Material life is only the area of activity that gives human beings conditions and purposes in order to establish relationships with the spirit and the all-greatest, that of the creational. It is completely wrong to restrict the field of view of life only to observable phenomena and to let the valuations of objective worth determine things. The highness and greatness of life depend on to what extent it is raised to the law of the innermost life in the highest being. The relationships between human beings are only justified as long as they do not distract from the eternal laws of the spiritual nature. Life is a teaching of the spirit for the spirit. The human being lives in the creation being. It breathes and hovers in him.
Contact Report 018.
The creation exists in every human being as a part piece of himself or herself.
Contact Report 034.
Do you have a better memory?
It is probably much superior to yours, but my power in this regard is not unlimited either. No material form of life has an unlimited power of memory. This is only attained in purely spiritual forms when the spirit can get rid of the material body, no longer needs it, and is closer to the creative being than to life.
Contact Report 036.
On the 14th of October, something new appeared. Some obviously very highly developed life form has penetrated me in telepathic form and has revealed very interesting things to me. She told me to call her Petley. The meaning of this name, however, is not clear to me, because I found several meanings in the Secret Science Dictionary for it.
I am aware of that. The life form that has contacted you is not one that you suppose, but a pure spirit being that is already absolutely genderless. It is therefore not a form of being in the nature of he or she, but an IT, a high level of pure spirit, the last level before the union of creation. It should also be noted that this high form only corresponds in its entirety to an ego, because it is already a union of many spirit forms into the WE. This means that when it speaks to you, which can only happen from one side, it speaks of you or me, but with which it speaks of the united WE.
So this means that we is ego just as I am ego in this case?
Sure, I do not know a better explanation. This form is nearing perfection and is many levels higher than the level Arahat Atharsata. From this level, however, the Petale level was informed about you. For you, Petale means wheel of time in the form you are approached with.
Contact Report 079.
Unfortunately, for many human beings, only the death of their physical body means the beginning of their actual life, and thus the gradual resurgence of their inner Sohar. In the book Talmud Emmanuel, Sohar, aka Zohar, is defined as the radiant splendor of spiritual creational energy. Since your spirit of life in you is a part of the spiritual energy of creation, it is necessary to reflect on this creational root of your being in order to unite yourselves through true internalization with the all-great time within yourselves. For to be one with the spirit of life in yourselves, with the part of creation in yourselves, means to become absolutely free, so also free from the fear of passing away, of death. To be one with the part of creation's energy in yourself also means to recognize your other ego behind your outer ego, namely the creational self. It is certainly the greatest, for the still inwardly unprepared ones, but truly the most terrifying thing that can happen to a human being, namely to truly see and recognize himself or herself, his or her innate ego, which reaches beyond all spheres and boundaries and floats beyond all senses into the all-great time and humanly incomprehensible realms of the creation. But the one who unites himself or herself with the part piece of creation within himself or herself, with the spirit, solves at the same time the riddle of the passing away, of death, which is so frightening for the human being and yet truthfully harmless, if he or she recognizes death as only the other side of life, which means nothing else than sleep in the physical realm, which replaces the wakefulness of the day. What the life-abandoned human body is only imperfectly able to unravel, the part of creation in you is able to reveal with all clarity and truth, namely, the certainty of your absolute duration in the all-great timeliness.
Contact Report 841.
Quantum technology is actually based on the fact that it can be used, for example, to explain the basic behavior of energy and matter in the atomic and subatomic range. Quantum technology is actually the basis of so-called modern physics, which is actually concerned with creation energy, but which is still erroneously called spirit. This is probably from a religious point of view, because the Earthling is a believer in religion. In the level of creation energy, that is to say the quantum level, as it can also be called, which for the time being is probably the last realization for physics, is actually the level of the original substance of matter. This level, which precedes matter, has no measurable particles for material technology and likewise no waves, because it already reaches the area of the outer levels of creation energy, which can no longer be measured with gross material apparatus. This energy level is distributed in the entire space of creation, that is to say, in the entirety of all 7 universes, each of which has a different dimension and exists within one another. So we can speak of a quantum field that is in itself superluminously attuned to all forms of creation energy, thus permeating all 7 dimensions of the 7 universes in creation space. This field is actually egg-shaped. The creation with all its 7 dimensions, which are interwoven and independent of each other, is, roughly speaking, egg-shaped.
Contact Report 863.
The teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life, whereby at first earlier the teaching of creation energy was simply called teaching of the spirit, because the time had not yet come to eradicate the old-fashioned wrong term, spirit, and correctly rename it creation energy.